I'm Kendra Monroe, 29 years old, and for 4 years I was the one keeping my family from falling apart. I'm a high school teacher in Seattle, living modestly, working hard, and sending most of my paycheck back home. My father lost his job at the shop, my mother quit hers, and my brother's business never got off the ground. Still, I covered the mortgage, the bills, and even bailed them out more times than I can count. But the night my father looked across the table and said, "How does it feel to be dumber than a pig?" something in me snapped. My sister threw my plate into the grass like it was garbage. My mother laughed like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all year. And that was the last time I let them talk to me like I didn't matter. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to protect you. I grew up believing that family meant showing up even when it wasn't easy. My parents weren't wealthy, far from it, but they taught us to be decent, to help each other, and to take care of the people we loved. I believed in that so deeply that when things got hard for them, I didn't hesitate. I was 25, newly hired at Lincoln High, still figuring out how to manage my classroom and my rent at the same time. But when Dad's shop closed and the mortgage notice came in, I stepped up. I told myself it was just for a while, just long enough for things to stabilize. That while turned into 4 years. I sent $2,500 every month to cover the mortgage, another few hundred for groceries and power. And then there were the extras, when the car broke down, when my niece needed a stroller, when someone forgot to budget for heating oil. My father, Walter, never said thank you. Not once. He just went back to the backyard, firing up the grill and talking about how the world owed him a break. My mother, Janice, had been working part-time at the library until she decided she couldn't take the stress. She told me, "We raised you to be generous," as if that explained everything. I'd be grading essays at midnight with a splitting headache while her messages buzzed in asking if I could cover another unexpected bill. My older brother Aaron called one night during a thunderstorm, said his business had tanked and he needed a loan. I sent him $30,000 without blinking. He had a baby on the way, and I figured again that's what family does, but he never paid it back. The baby came and so did the excuses. I started seeing Dr. Harlan the year I cracked in the staff lounge, trying to smile while holding back tears over a stack of tests. He listened carefully, then said something I couldn't forget. "You've given them everything, but what have they left for you?" That question kept me up at night. I'd grown up thinking being useful would earn me love. Instead, I became invisible, a bank account with a voice. Mallory. My younger sister was the baby of the family. Always bright, always charming, always too busy with brunches and baby showers to call me back. When she got engaged to Tyler, a guy with a 6-figure salary in tech, she started texting me about house hunting. Bellevue, 3 bedrooms, white fence. But the down payment. That was on me, apparently. Another $20,000 to keep it in the family. I don't remember when the resentment started building. Maybe it was the night I checked my credit report and found a personal loan I didn't recognize when Mallory had co-signed with my name on it. Maybe it was when Mom called me selfish for saying no. Or maybe it was that sticky summer night when we sat outside under the string lights pretending we were still a family, and Dad opened his mouth and gutted me in front of everyone. Whatever it was, the line was crossed. And in part 2, you'll see exactly how far they went before I finally said enough. That voicemail came less than 24 hours after I walked out of the backyard barbecue. My mother's voice sounded almost unfamiliar, tight-shaking not a trace of her usual sharpness. She said the house was at risk, that they needed $50,000 by the end of the week or they'd lose it for good. I listened to the message twice sitting in the dark, the screen of my phone lighting the room. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened the night before, just urgency, panic, and a soft edge of desperation. The next morning I took a slow walk to the corner cafe. My hands were still cold from the night before, and I kept turning the words over in my head. I pulled out my phone again, opened the message thread with the whole family and typed, 3 people begging a pig. I hit send and waited. There was no reply for almost an hour. Then the group chat lit up like a fire. Mallory called me twice. My father left a string of missed calls. I didn't answer any of them. That one message, 10 words, shifted something. I wasn't their buffer anymore. I started going back through my records. The monthly transfers I'd set up had all been so automatic I barely thought about them. Mortgage, utilities, a grocery card for my parents. I canceled every one. The confirmations came in one by one soft chimes that sounded louder than they should have. I called Martin Ellis, our family lawyer, and asked for a meeting that same day. He'd helped me once before reviewing some paperwork when I started noticing odd activity on my credit file. I didn't say much over the phone, just that I was bringing documents and needed him to take a look. Aunt Diane met me outside his office. She had a paper coffee cup in one hand and a manila folder in the other. "I've seen things," she said, pressing the folder into my hands. Receipts, casino stubs in Walter's truck. Big ones. I didn't ask why she'd been looking. I didn't have to. We went up together. Martin laid everything out across his desk: loan applications, bank records, credit reports I'd printed at work the night before. He looked over each one, carefully running a highlighter down the co-signed loan from 6 months ago. The total was $30,000 issued to my brother, but backed by me and my sister's forged signature. The payment history was a mess, late fees, stacked up interest growing fast. Martin set down his pen and looked at me over his glasses. "This," he said, tapping the page, "is potential fraud." Diane leaned in and flipped another document toward him. "It didn't stop there," she said. "Check the dates. They opened another credit line 2 months ago. A second loan, $15,000, all routed to the house." Martin read the document, then pushed his chair back. "If this goes to court," he said, "there's a case." We sat in silence for a moment. Then he picked up a yellow legal pad and began drafting a letter. The ultimatum was simple: sign a repayment agreement using the family home as collateral or face legal action. I watched him fold it neatly, place it in a firm white envelope, and press the flap closed with his palm. Diane watched too, nodding slowly. "They won't go quietly," she said. She was right. They didn't. My father stormed into Martin's office just after 3 o'clock that afternoon. His face was red, his voice louder than it needed to be, and Janice followed behind him, eyes red-rimmed and voice already cracking. "This is blackmail," Walter said, throwing the unopened envelope onto Martin's desk. "You think you can threaten your own parents?" Janice sat down hard in the leather chair, her shoulders already shaking. "Kendra, how can you do this to us?" she whispered. "We're your blood." Mallory stood just outside the door, arms crossed tight across her chest. She didn't say much at first, just kept glancing between us and the door behind her like she wanted to leave. Walter's voice grew louder with every sentence. He denied everything, said there'd been a mix-up, that the signature on the loan wasn't real, that the money had gone to repairs. When Mallory finally spoke, her voice was low and uneven. "It was for the family," she said, not looking at me. "It wasn't supposed to get this far." Martin didn't flinch. He slid the agreement back across the desk and waited. Diane stood with her arms folded, saying nothing. For a moment, no one moved. Then Walter grabbed the pen tight like it might break in his hand and signed. Janice followed, sobbing quietly. Mallory hesitated, but eventually wrote her name. The room was quiet except for the scratch of ink against paper. Martin gathered the pages, stacked them in a folder, and nodded. "Payments start next month," he said. "Miss one and we file." They left without another word. Walter shot me one last look before slamming the door. "You'll regret this," he said. I met his eyes. "I don't think I will." The fallout came fast. By the next morning, my phone was full again. Voicemails, texts, unread messages. Janice's messages came first. Her voice broke in every one. She said the bank had called, that the payments bounced, that she didn't know what to do. Then Walter's voice, harder, clipped. He accused me of turning on my own family, said I was heartless, said I was the reason everything was falling apart. I deleted each one without listening all the way through. Midweek, during a quiet moment between classes, I got a text from Aaron. "Heard the meeting went south," it said. "Yolanda and I talked. You did what you had to. I read it twice." His follow-up came a few hours later. If you need backup, we're here. No strings. I didn't answer right away, but I didn't delete it either. On Friday, Mallory showed up at my school. She waited until the final bell, standing just outside my classroom door with a coffee cup in both hands. Her makeup was smudged, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. I stepped into the hallway and she asked if we could talk. I led her into the faculty lounge where the vending machine hummed and the windows looked out over the parking lot. She didn't sit, just stood shifting her weight from one foot to the other. It was Tyler, she said, after a long pause. He said it'd be temporary, just until the wedding. He promised we'd pay it back. Her voice cracked. I didn't know it would snowball. She looked down at her hands. They leaned on me too, she said. But I get it now. Why you're done. I didn't say anything for a while, just let her words hang in the space between us. Eventually, I nodded. It's not just the money, I said. It's everything. She nodded too once, then set the coffee down and left. I stood in the lounge for a long time after the door closed, watching the parking lot slowly empty, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. In the weeks that followed, the rest of the family kept their distance. But the damage and the rumors had already begun. It started small, a few missed calls from people I hadn't spoken to in years, a vague message from a cousin asking if I was doing all right. Then Aunt Diane mentioned that someone from her bridge group had pulled her aside after a meeting. I didn't know Kendra was going through something, the woman had whispered, hand on her arm. Janice made it sound like she's not well. That was the beginning. By the end of the week, it was showing up everywhere. The stories changed depending on who was telling them. At church, my parents painted me as a cold daughter who'd cut them off without reason. On the neighborhood Facebook page, Janice posted a long cryptic message about hardship and unexpected cruelty from those you raise. Walter told anyone who'd listen that I had money tucked away and was hoarding it while they faced homelessness. Some people believed them. Others sent me silent glances when we crossed paths, the kind that said they didn't know what to believe. At school, I kept my head down. I stayed late, locked my door during free periods, and spent more time with the after-school tutoring group, just to avoid the silence at home. The parent-teacher nights got quieter. A few parents who used to chat with me after class now just nodded quickly and moved on. Word travels fast in communities like ours. Even when you've done nothing wrong, you can feel the weight of it on your back. I didn't argue. I didn't post anything in return or try to set the record straight. But I felt it. The calls stopped coming. Invitations dried up. One Saturday, I showed up at a cousin's birthday brunch and saw the table already full, no space, no extra chair. "Didn't know you were coming," someone said, avoiding my eyes. I left before the coffee was poured. Diane kept me updated. She heard things at her gym from friends at the credit union, from neighbors who'd known us for years. "They're saying you're unstable," she told me during one of our weekly lunches. "That you snapped, took all your money, and left them to starve." She said it gently, but the words still landed hard. "They're spreading it on purpose," she added, "trying to shame you into giving in." I went home that night and opened my laptop. I clicked through my financial dashboard. The numbers were better than they had been in years. No leaks, no overdrafts, no surprise withdrawals. But I also noticed something I hadn't seen before. A new entry, a past due account tied to a credit extension I hadn't used in years. $15,000 added, quietly dated back to a time I'd been too busy covering bills to double-check the fine print. I called Nolan, the financial advisor Aunt Diane had recommended months earlier. He pulled everything up during our next Zoom session and walked me through the audit. "It's from an old guarantor clause," he explained, "tied to a joint account you forgot existed. It's all been routed to their address." He didn't have to say more. I understood. The hole was deeper than I thought. But he also gave me something else, a plan. "We can fix this," he said. 18 months to clean it all. You'll have your savings back, retirement on track, and a travel fund if you want it." We spent the next hour making decisions, canceling unused subscriptions, adjusting contributions, setting aside money for emergencies that were mine, not theirs. He asked if I had any dreams I'd put on hold. I told him about the small condo in Portland I'd bookmarked years ago. He added it to the spreadsheet and smiled. The next day, I sat across from Diane at our usual spot overlooking the Sound. I told her about the audit, the old account, the new plan. She nodded slowly and said, "They won't stop until someone else tells them to." So we brought in Dr. Harland. He'd helped me once before, but this time he suggested something bigger, a family session. Not for repair, he said, but for clarity. We scheduled it for the following week. Preston came first. He arrived early. Yolanda at his side, both of them quiet but steady. Yolanda kept her hands folded in her lap, her wedding ring turning slowly between her fingers. When they spoke, it was careful, measured. "We should have said something sooner," Preston said. "We saw how bad it was getting, but we didn't know how to help." Diane nodded, her voice low but firm. "Walter's mess isn't yours to mop up." The session lasted just under 2 hours. Harlan guided us through each piece, letting silence do the work when words fell short. There were long pauses, quiet tears. No screaming, no accusations, just lines drawn, boundaries spoken aloud. No one mentioned forgiveness. That wasn't what we were there for. We were there to put things down and walk away lighter. By the end of the month, I started packing my apartment in Seattle. I found a listing in Portland, a 1-bedroom with sage green walls and a small view of the Willamette. Rent was modest. The neighborhood was quiet. I signed the lease the same day I toured it. By early fall, I was living alone in a 1-bedroom apartment just outside Portland. The walls were painted a soft sage green, and the kitchen had a small window that let in the morning light. Rent was $1,200 a month, manageable on my teaching salary with room left over for savings. I unpacked slowly, taking time to place each book, each framed photo, each plate I'd picked out for myself instead of inheriting from someone else's cabinet. The space felt quiet in a way I hadn't known I needed. There were no dropped hints, no background hum of someone else's chaos. Just the click of my own shoes on hardwood and the hum of a fridge that belonged to no one but me. I picked up freelance tutoring again, small projects, at first lesson plans for history units, custom modules for charter schools. They started coming in steadily by mid-October, and by the end of the month, I was earning almost $20,000 a year on top of my salary. It wasn't flashy, but it added a new kind of rhythm to my days. I'd wake early, drink my coffee while reviewing test rubrics, then teach remotely from a corner desk that overlooked the park down the street. In the afternoons, I walked the river trails with my phone on silent. Leaves drifted down in slow spirals. Squirrels darted across the path. My pace wasn't hurried. I didn't need it to be. Every so often, I'd check my phone out of habit. The blocked numbers were still there. Missed calls from Walter and Janice, all marked as no caller ID, bouncing into silence. Mallory's name appeared once, then disappeared again. The messages didn't get through. I didn't open the inbox, not even once. Diane called weekly sometimes just to share a recipe, sometimes just to hear how I was settling in. Preston and Yolanda sent postcards, a habit they picked up after a weekend trip to Astoria. The last one sat on my fridge, a picture of the lighthouse, and 3 short words written in Preston's blocky handwriting. "You did it." The foreclosure finalized in January. The bank served the papers after a string of missed payments. Diane told me that deputies had arrived just after sunrise, snow still clinging to the lawn. The notice was taped to the front door. Walter had tried to negotiate with the lender, but the damage was done. The house was listed 2 weeks later, stripped of the porch furniture, and the wooden swing I'd sanded and stained myself during my second summer of teaching. Janice didn't leave the house for 3 days after that. When she finally did, it was to pick up a part-time shift at the dollar store on 32nd. Diane saw her there once folding tissue paper for Valentine's Day, displays her shoulders rounded, her voice small. Walter found janitor work at a strip mall. He clocked in at 5 and finished past midnight. Diane said he looked older. The casino receipts started showing up again, tucked into his glove box, half-crumpled dates fresh. Mallory's engagement unraveled by spring. Tyler ended things quietly, citing too much family tension and a work relocation he couldn't put off. The venue refunded part of the deposit, but not enough to matter. Her job search didn't go far. The designer circles in Bellevue were tight-knit, and whispers travel fast in industries like that. She sent a text once from a number I didn't recognize. It read, "Everything's falling apart. Help." I read it while sitting in the park. I was on a bench near the cherry trees, and the wind carried petals across my lap. I deleted it without replying. By March, the quiet had become a kind of rhythm. I filled my calendar with what I wanted: weekend workshops on local history, walks through farmers markets, short solo trips to the coast. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center and started baking on Sundays. The silence at night didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. The echo in the apartment became something I recognized, not emptiness space. The scars didn't vanish. They just stopped stinging every time I touched them. I kept the documents from Martin Ellis in a locked drawer, not because I needed them, but because I'd promised myself never to forget. Nolan and I still checked in once a month, updating charts, rebalancing contributions. The condo I'd once dreamed of didn't feel like a fantasy anymore. It felt like something I could walk toward, not sprint, not crawl, just move steadily with both hands free. The thing that surprised me most was how still it all became, how no one pushed, no one cornered me at the grocery store, no one sent relatives to guilt me over brunch. The noise had burned itself out. What was left was quiet, not in absence, but in peace. The message came on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped through the mail slot in a plain white envelope with no return address. I found it between a utility bill and a flyer for a new yoga studio down the block. The handwriting on the front was neat, almost formal, the kind you see on wedding invitations or sympathy cards. Inside was a folded sheet of paper torn at the edge like it had come from a notebook. 5 words handwritten in black ink. "Please talk to me. Mallory." I left it on the kitchen counter next to the fruit bowl. That evening, I made soup, prepped a lesson plan, and folded laundry with the television playing softly in the background. I didn't touch the envelope again until the next morning. I tucked it into my bag without thinking, carried it with me through the day. It wasn't until Friday, after my last tutoring session, that I saw her again waiting just outside the community center, arms crossed, jacket too thin for the chill in the air. She didn't speak right away, just looked at me like she wasn't sure I'd stop. I did. We stood in silence for a moment before she said, "Can we talk somewhere that's not the sidewalk?" I led her around to the side entrance where a few benches overlooked the parking lot. She sat first, her hands gripping the edge of the seat like she was bracing for a fall. She started talking before I asked. Said she'd been staying with a friend in Tacoma, that Tyler had cut off contact after the engagement ended, that her job interviews kept drying up. "I can't go back to the house," she said, voice low. "It's gone anyway. The bank cleared it out last week." I let her speak. She told me she didn't know about the second credit line, the one that had tipped things over, that Walter had added her name without asking, that Janice told her it was already handled. I believed them, she said, her voice catching. I didn't want to look too close. I thought if I kept moving forward, it would all settle. Her fingers tugged at the sleeve of her jacket, and for a second she looked younger than I remembered. "I wasn't just leaning on you," she said. "I was hiding behind you." She didn't ask for anything, not directly, just sat there waiting. I told her I'd moved on, that I had no intention of reopening what had already been closed. She nodded like she'd expected that, but it still stung. "I get it," she said quietly, but I needed to say it, out loud. She stood and left without hugging me, which felt more honest than if she had. I sat there a little longer, watching the light shift across the pavement. There was no relief in the conversation, no clarity. But it was the first time she hadn't made herself the center of the story. Later that evening, Diane called. "Mallory came by," she said. "Didn't ask for money, just told me she finally understood. That you were the only one who ever said no." Diane paused. That matters more than you think. 2 days after that, I ran into Yolanda at the market near my apartment. She was picking out oranges, her cart half full, her jacket zipped up to her chin. She smiled when she saw me, and we ended up walking the aisles together for a while. She asked how I was doing. I said I was settling in. She nodded and said she was glad. "Preston wants to invite you for dinner," she said as we reached the checkout. "Just the three of us. No pressure. I didn't say yes right away, but I didn't say no." I went through my week like usual morning routines, quiet afternoons, river walks when the weather held. But things felt a little different now. Not open exactly, just not closed. At the end of the month, my bank app lit up with the usual alerts. Except one of them was different. A new transfer scheduled not from me. It was labeled Repayment 112, and it came from Walter's old business account. Diane called the next morning to confirm it. "They're making the payments," she said. "Or trying to." She didn't sound surprised. Just tired. I printed the notice, filed it with the rest of the paperwork from Martin Ellis, and slid it back into the drawer. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen and made a pot of tea. The wind pushed at the window panes, and the apartment creaked in the way old buildings do when the air shifts just slightly. I didn't check my phone. I didn't scroll through anything. I just stood by the sink, holding the mug in both hands, watching the steam rise. I didn't hear the first round of fallout, not directly. It started instead with a short text from Diane on a Sunday morning. "Church was quiet today," she wrote. Too quiet. Words getting out. I set the phone down beside my coffee and let the silence settle in. Whatever had shifted, I wasn't the one pushing anymore. Later that week, Diane filled me in. Walter had gone to the church board to ask for help, not money, just sympathy. Claimed he'd been taken advantage of by someone he trusted. But someone else in the congregation, a retired accountant named Mr. Barlow, had overheard the name on the co-signed loan. Barlow's niece worked at the same credit union that flagged the foreclosure notice. The numbers didn't match the story. When Barlow asked questions, Walter got defensive, then angry. "That's when people started doing their own math," Diane said. And the math didn't favor him. Janice didn't show up the following Sunday. Diane said her name still came up, but now in whispers and half-finished sentences. "She always seems so put together," someone murmured near the coffee table. "I wonder what really happened." Mallory, it turned out, hadn't been as quiet as I thought. She'd confided in one of her old design classmates, someone who remembered me from years back. The story circled from there. The forgery, the loans, the sudden silence after years of help. People connected dots in their own way, but the conclusion started sounding familiar. Not cruel, just honest. By the time April rolled in, even Preston noticed the shift. He called one evening just after dinner, his voice clear over the line. "Yolanda ran into someone at the bank," he said. "They knew who you were. Said you'd handled things with class." He paused, then added, "They also said Mom tried to open another account in your name last year. Got blocked at the ID check. I didn't say much. I just listened." Preston sighed. "I should have said something earlier," he told me. "We saw the signs. We just didn't want to get between you and them." He asked if I wanted to come to dinner that weekend. Just them, no pressure. I told him I'd think about it. The next day, a small envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a thank you card, plain cream colored, with a note from Yolanda. "We're proud of you," she wrote, "no matter how it looks from the outside." That week, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. Mrs. Ellison, my high school literature teacher. She was browsing the mystery section at the local bookstore downtown. We talked for a few minutes, catching up on teaching the shift to remote learning and the way schools were changing. As we said goodbye, she touched my arm gently. "You turned out steady," she said. "They don't always." The next day, I got a voicemail from the secretary at the district office. They were reviewing applications for a new instructional consultant position, part-time, flexible, higher pay. She encouraged me to apply. I hadn't put my name in for anything. Someone else must have. I submitted the paperwork that night. Toward the end of the month, I took a walk past the house I used to rent in Seattle. It was boarded up now, a for sale sign hanging at an angle in the front yard. The swing was gone. The garden had overgrown. A set of flyers had been stapled to the nearby telephone pole, missing pets, a garage sale, a notice about neighborhood repairs. Nothing connected to me. Nothing pointing back. The house wasn't mine to mourn. But I stood across the street for a while anyway, watching the way the curtains shifted behind cracked windows. A man came out of the house next door and gave me a polite nod. I nodded back, then turned and walked the other way. That evening Diane called again. "I saw Janice today," she said. She didn't say anything, but she looked straight at me in the parking lot. There was a pause. It was the first time I didn't feel small under her gaze. She told me Walter was working fewer shifts now, something about his health maybe. He'd been seen sitting alone on the bench outside the strip mall where he cleaned, just watching cars go by. People talk to him less, Diane said, not because they're angry, just tired. She paused again before adding, "He's not the man who raised you. Not anymore." I didn't answer right away. There was nothing to say. Some things don't need closure to be finished. The payment agreement lasted 4 months before the check stopped clearing. The first one bounced quietly, a minor delay blamed on a bank holiday. The second came back marked insufficient. Martin flagged it and forwarded me the notice with a brief subject line, "Terms breached." I didn't respond right away. I waited for the third. When that one failed too, I booked a call with him for the following Tuesday. We met over video. His tie was loosened, his voice calm. "We have options," he said, "but you need to decide if you want to pursue them." I asked what would happen if we didn't. He didn't sugarcoat it. "The court would likely rule in your favor," he said. "But the process is public. There's no undoing that." I told him I'd think about it. That night I went for a long walk along the Willamette. The river was calm, but the wind had picked up. A row of ducks trailed across the surface in single file. Somewhere behind me, a bike bell rang, then faded. I walked until the streetlights flickered on one by one. 2 days later, Diane called. Her voice was even, but I could hear something in it. "They're saying you're threatening to sue," she said. "Janice told someone at the store you were trying to take what little they had left." I didn't answer. "People are starting to tune it out," she added. "They've heard too many versions." By early May, the tension snapped. Janice showed up at Diane's unannounced, standing in the driveway with a folder clutched in both hands. She looked tired, Diane said later. Not angry, just worn out. She handed over copies of the paperwork, canceled checks, old receipts, 2 loan statements I hadn't even seen. She said she was done pretending Diane told me, that Walter hadn't made a full payment since February, that he was still going to the casino. I forwarded everything to Martin. He confirmed what I already suspected. Walter had taken out a short-term advance in his name to cover one of the installments, then let it lapse. The penalties alone nearly tripled the original balance. Martin asked again if I wanted to file. "It's your right," he said. "But rights don't always bring peace." I told him no. Instead, I mailed a letter, 2 paragraphs typed with my signature at the bottom. The first confirmed that I would not be pursuing charges. The second stated plainly that no further contact would be welcomed. It wasn't forgiveness. It was final. I mailed copies to Walter, Janice, and Mallory. I sent one to the old family address, though I knew the mailbox had long been emptied. The others I addressed to their known locations, a P.O. box, a borrowed couch, a street without numbers. I didn't expect replies. I didn't get any. The silence that followed felt different from the quiet I'd built in Portland. This one carried weight. It stayed in the corners of the day, in the space between phone calls, in the lull after work. But it didn't feel wrong. It just felt real. That month, I finished paying off the last of my own student loans. Nolan called me to confirm the balance. "You're clean," he said. "No entanglements, no holds." I updated my will that same week and added a clause about charitable giving, a scholarship fund for first-generation educators based out of the Seattle district. Diane offered to help set it up. Preston and Yolanda volunteered to contribute. In June, I attended a small community gathering in Portland, part teacher meetup, part neighborhood potluck. Someone asked me where I used to live, and I said Seattle. That was it. No pause, no story. Just a city I'd once called home. A week later, I got a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a small wooden box with a clasp that stuck. I recognized it, an old keepsake box I'd made in shop class when I was 16. Inside were a few photos, a pendant I'd lost years ago, and a folded note. The handwriting was Mallory's. "I know I can't fix what we broke," it said, "but I wanted you to have this. It always belonged to you." I didn't write back, but I kept the box. The box sat on my bookshelf for weeks, not hidden, but not on display either, just resting there among the paperbacks and lesson binders, steady and quiet. I never opened it again after the first time. I didn't need to. It wasn't about what was inside. It was about what wasn't weighing on me anymore. Summer passed gently. The teaching schedule lightened, and my freelance work picked up just enough to keep things moving. I spent more mornings walking the river trail and more afternoons watching the sun shift through the windows. The light had changed since I moved in, softer, somehow calmer. I noticed the sound of birds more than I used to. I learned the names of neighbors without ever feeling obligated to host or explain myself. It felt like my life had finally found its own shape. Preston and Yolanda stayed in touch, not often, but enough. Their messages were simple: a recipe, a photo of their daughter's first steps, a quiet check-in before the holidays. Diane visited every couple of months, always with something homemade in hand, and never a question I didn't want to answer. She'd walk through the door, glance around, and say, "Feel settled in here," as if she was confirming something for both of us. As for Walter and Janice, I don't know where they are now. I've heard pieces through Diane or old contacts who didn't know they were talking to me. I don't follow up. Mallory hasn't reached out since the box. I haven't seen her in person since that bench outside the community center. That chapter closed quieter than I expected. No outburst, no last apology, just stillness. Sometimes people ask if I ever miss them, if the silence feels like a hole. I don't know how to answer that. There's a kind of grief in cutting ties even when they needed to be cut. But there's also a kind of mercy, the kind you give yourself when you stop waiting to be understood by people who never tried. The truth is, I didn't walk away to hurt them. I walked away because I was drowning in a version of love that only flowed one way. I used to think loyalty meant endurance, staying through anything, absorbing whatever came. Now I understand it differently. Loyalty has to include yourself, or it stops being loyalty and becomes sacrifice. The life I have now isn't dramatic or grand. It's just mine. The choices, the quiet, the people I let in. I spend more time with students who remind me why I started teaching in the first place. I take weekend drives down the coast. I sleep without checking my phone for emergencies I didn't cause. I have a list of things I still want to do, none of them extravagant, but all of them possible. That's more than I could say before. So if you're listening to this and holding your breath, waiting for permission to step away from something that's bleeding you dry, let this be it. You don't owe anyone your peace. You don't have to earn kindness by suffering first. You can choose a different ending. And if any part of this story felt familiar, I'd love to hear where you're listening from. You're not alone, not by a long shot. Thanks for staying with me through the end.